Cell phones are a problem, not only in middle schools and high schools, but also in classrooms on college campuses. Professor Howard Aldrich, one of the world's leading sociologists and a board member of EIX, has recently experimented with limiting cell phone use in his classes at Chapel Hill, and the results have been fantastic. He's here to share with us his experience and advice. Thanks for being with me, Howard.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this conversation. This is a subject very close to my heart.
So, first, why is it important to limit cell phone use in the classroom?
We've known for a long time cognitively that distractions really interfere with learning. I'm often telling students, choose a place to study where you won't be distracted. We know the consequences there. And with regard to the classroom, there's a lot of research. And I just saw something actually in the Times the last couple of days about some new research. It's really, really disruptive to have people in the classroom being on their devices, their laptops, their cell phones. And it's important actually in two ways, kind of interesting. One of them is for themselves, the people who are otherwise engaged pretty much are disrupting their own learning. But what's really bad about it is that people around them also are distracted. And there's studies that show this, that people who have others, 2 or 3 seats away from them, looking at something other than classwork, also find their learning struggles. They complain about it. So we know that it has deleterious consequences. They were monitoring what students are doing in the class without having to ask them. They just had their laptops plugged into the system so they could see what they were doing. And the people who spent more time with non-class work did worse in the class. It was directly negatively correlated. So there's a lot of evidence to show that for the students and for those around them, it's really best to have them in a completely closed, learning-focused environment.
So, you're talking not only cell phones, but any technology.
Laptops, yes, especially laptops. One of the things you might have done, I do this occasionally when I walk through hallways looking in classrooms. You walk into the back of a big classroom and you saw these laptops. You're looking down the rows of laptops and what's on the screens? I can guarantee you're going to see YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, not Facebook anymore, but Reels. You're going to see a lot of stuff on those screens. It's very clear that people use laptops for reasons other than instructional purposes.
So, what pushed you to make a change in your classes, and what exactly did you do?
So, a few years ago, I started noticing in my honors seminar that even honors students would be sitting there on their phones and particularly during group work. So during the class, quite often when we were having back and forth, I was either lecturing or we're having discussion, they were pretty good about it. But when we would break into groups, 1 or 2 of the students very quickly would pull out a cell phone and I'd see them on their phones. And then I would see even really good students during the class occasionally with the phone on their desktop, on that phone. And I started talking to them about that. And the students almost were kind of giving a cry for help. One of them told me she spent 10 hours a day on her phone. I had another student, a journalism major, who should know better, I think, from the point of view of distraction. And she told me she was trying to be a good student, but I looked in the back, she sat maybe 3/4 of the way back, and she'd have her phone out during the class and on it, and she'd see me looking at her and she'd stop. And I realized that it was very difficult for the students on their own to control themselves. They were so accustomed to doing it. They were so accustomed to having their phone as their right hand or left hand. They themselves couldn't self-monitor. That's when it hit me. Somebody has to intervene here to take the students' will, intentionality out of the equation. I'll tell you what I did, for example, this spring. I came into class, I had my phone, held my phone up to them, and I said, okay, what do we do first in the class? I said, not just put it to airplane mode, turn the phone off. And I put it down, I put it in my bag, and I said to the students, I said, you do this. And so from that point on, the first few classes, when they came in, I reminded them. In fact, often throughout the semester, I would just make a show of it. I did explain to them. I told them about the research. I said, you'll do better in this class. You'll be more engaged. And so I monitored as we went through. And it worked. Occasionally, because we had laptops for many of the projects, occasionally I'd have to go around and if I ever saw a student on a site I didn't recognize, I would just ask them, "What are you doing?" Or, I was pretty much in their face. I didn't brook any dissent. And I got no pushback when I first told them this. And some of the students said, yeah, they understood this. Nobody ever complained about it. And when, as I said, during the semester, cell phones were never a problem. A couple of other things. I noticed that if you go to a typical classroom in the old days before cell phones, if you walk into a classroom before class started, kids were talking to each other. They were speaking to each other. They were engaged, talking about what happened the night before, about schoolwork, about upcoming ball games. And then the cell phones came along. Walk into class, they're all their heads down. So one of the things that I think happened in my class is that the kids would come in. Some of them would still be on the phones, but some would turn the phones off. They talked to their friends before class started. They actually in more social interaction. I loved that because one of the goals of this class has got some non-pedagogical components to it. And one of the ideas of the first year honor seminar is to get the students in a community, get them to be real engaged learners. And so you want them to get to know each other. And so I've discovered in past semesters that these students form friendship groups that last 4 years. I know some of these groups continue past graduation. So I think that was one of the side benefits I really hadn't thought about before, but it does actually give them more space for human to human interaction.
Not only did they respond by being more engaged in the classroom, and I'm assuming their grades and their performance benefited, but even their social interactions. I totally agree with you. I miss that.
People sometimes, I don't know why, they seem to be afraid. There'll be something I say, who's the boss here? Who's the adult in the room? Who's in charge? It's your class. You're responsible. And I try to put a burden on the people who kind of hesitate. I say, look, you're doing a disservice to the students in your class who want a non-distractive environment. If you don't do something about it, we know what's going to happen. You're responsible for that. If the students in the class who want to learn can't learn, that's up to you. It's down to you. So you can't ignore the situation. We set up rules. We have enforcement mechanisms. You have to make a situation a constraint such that it's just off the table. Is that they don't have to make a decision because they've agreed by being in the class, this is what they're going to do.
But it sounds like you also explained to them. You didn't just come in and, use the stick and say no cell phone use. What did you explain to them so that they bought in?
One of the things we know, a lot of great experiments, we know that humans really want to be told why they're doing something. Just giving orders like a military chain of command kind of thing you may receive compliance, but it's going to be grudging compliance. But when I say to them, look, we know this helps your grades. We know you'll feel better about class. We know that it'll make studying for the next exam easier because you'll have better notes. So there are positive reasons to turn the cell phone. That's why I think I didn't get any pushback.
So I have to disclaim that I tried it last fall and I name dropped you. I said, my good friend and super famous sociologist at Chapel Hill is doing this. And they were excellent. Every once in a while, I had a student who they were expecting a call from an interview and they would always let me know, super polite. I was never going to stop someone from taking an important call. Or if someone had, say something going on in their family, they were always very, very polite. And it reminded me a little bit of the olden days where during breaks, they would talk. They would talk to one another and form friendships and go to coffee after class rather than sitting there isolated. For others who are looking to implement something similar with limiting technology in the classroom, what would be your advice?
Don't wait. It's very difficult. If you wait and say, okay, let me see how things are going, it's too late. First day of class, the first things you want to do, and as I said, I do it. It's the first thing I do. So don't wait and don't allow when the silence is broken by a cell phone ringing, you stop. When somebody didn't get the message, make a little joke of it, but you really have to make sure that the students know you'll be enforcing this. As I said, I think once you explain it to them and start on day one, I never had to stop a student after that point.
So they didn't even take out laptops either.
I have explained to students that it's much better to take notes by hand because if you use a laptop, you wind up transcribing, and transcribing is not the way to take notes. If you're going to take notes, do it in a mindful way, which pretty much means doing it by hand. But I'm okay with people using laptops if they say that's the only way they can take notes.
My last question, you kind of touched on it before. So for anyone who kind of fears resistance from students, what's your advice? Showing them the research?
You could pull rank, but it's much easier just to say, if they do object, I would ask, well, why would you want your phone out? What would be the reasons for that? During class, when you're talking to your fellow students, talking to me, why would you want a phone out as well? It's hard to justify pedagogically having a non-classroom relevant device live while you're running a class. It's very hard to do. So if you ask them what their arguments are, you're not going to get any arguments. All the research is on the side of not having cell phones. There's no research that shows that having cell phones in the class enhances learning. None. There's research that shows that using laptops in a mindful way, like when you're doing generative AI, which is what I do occasionally in class, using laptops and very much integrated into the lesson plan, that is a positive effect. They're thinking about consequences. If you say, when people make a claim, you say, okay, what would the consequences of that be? You're going to take notes. I would expect it to be a product from that, right? I'd like to see it. Fair, isn't it? You say you're going to do that, it'll be useful. I can share with other students. Learn from you what you're getting out of the lecture will help me a lot.
Thank you so much for being with me today, Howard with EIX, and I'm Kim Eddleston. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.